It's a marshmallow world in the winter when the snow blankets the ground, soft and serene. For decades, Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra were Hollywood's most iconic duo, two legends who ruled the nightlife of Las Vegas like kings. They laughed together, performed together, and created magic that enchanted audiences across the world. To the public, their bond appeared unbreakable, almost brotherly. But behind the bright lights, things weren't as perfect as they seemed. Almost overnight, Dean Martin quietly stepped away from it all. He cut ties with Frank, erasing him from his personal life with no press conferences, no explanations, and no looking back. Fans were left in confusion. Rumors swirled, but the truth remained buried, hidden for years. What could have been so painful, so deeply personal, that it shattered one of the most legendary friendships in entertainment history? Now, 30 years after his death, we finally know why Dean erased Frank Sinatra from his life. Dean Martin was born Dino Paul Crecchetti on June 7, 1917, in Steubenville, Ohio. His beginnings were far from glamorous. He was the son of Gaetano, an Italian barber who worked tirelessly behind a modest chair, and Angela, a strong-willed Italian-American mother. Dino grew up in a household shaped by sacrifice and survival. English came late to him, and confidence even later. With an older brother named William and little money to spare, life taught Dino how to fight from an early age, both literally and metaphorically. At just 15, he stepped into the boxing ring under the name Kid Crotch, throwing bare-knuckle punches, as tape and proper gear were luxuries he couldn't afford. The scars remained with him, a broken nose, a split lip, and a body marked by the hardship of those early years. He liked to joke about his boxing record, claiming he lost nearly every fight but won the war. But the truth was, he kept standing when most others would have fallen. As Dino made his way to New York, hungry for success, he shared a cramped apartment with fellow dreamer Sonny King. Together, they turned desperation into spectacle, charging curious onlookers to watch them box without gloves in their living room. It was raw, reckless, and revealing. Once, it ended with Dino knocking out his roommate in the first round. When boxing faded from his life, he drifted into shadowy work at an illegal gambling room hidden behind a tobacco shop. But through it all, one thing remained constant: his voice. Singing under the name Dino Martini, inspired by his opera idol, he crooned with local bands shaped by the elegance of the singers he admired. His big break arrived with the Ernie Mackay Orchestra. By the late 1930s, his warm, aching voice began to turn heads. Then in 1940, a band leader named Sammy Watkins gave him a simple piece of advice that would change everything: change the name. And with that quiet turning point, Dean Martin was born. By 1943, Dean Martin had found his footing, working steadily in New York, chasing stages the way he had once chased survival. He was briefly drafted into the Army during World War II, but a hernia sent him home after just 14 months. It felt less like an end and more like a detour. The spotlight still whispered his name. Around this time, love entered the picture. In October of 1941, he married Elizabeth Betty Ann McDonald, and together they built a quiet life in Cleveland Heights. 4 children followed, along with years of ambition and strain. The marriage ended in 1949, long before the glitz and glamour of Hollywood would come calling. From a bare-knuckle boxer in Ohio to a rising star with national dreams, Dean had never taken the straight road. He was tough, charming, and full of contradictions, always evolving into something new. By the mid-1940s, he was grinding through smoky New York clubs night after night. He had the voice, the looks, and an effortless cool, but Hollywood remained frustratingly out of reach. Studios noticed him, flirted with the idea, and then moved on. Success seemed like a song he could almost finish, but never quite did. Then in August 1944, fate arrived in the form of chaos. While performing at the Glass Hat Club in the Belmont Plaza Hotel, Dean met a wild, unpredictable young comic named Jerry Lewis. Their first exchange was casual, almost forgettable, but something clicked. Two hungry performers, both desperate to make it, recognized the spark in each other. Their official debut as a duo came on July 24, 1946, at the 500 Club in Atlantic City. It almost ended in disaster. The audience sat silent, no laughs, no warmth. But then, given one last chance by the club owner, Dean and Jerry abandoned any plan and trusted their instincts. Dean sang with calm confidence, while Jerry exploded into a controlled disaster, crashing through the act like a human hurricane. The crowd erupted. From that moment on, Martin and Lewis were unstoppable. Their act was chaotic, playful, and alive, built on chemistry and hot polish. They teased, chased, interrupted, and laughed through every performance. Audiences didn't just watch them, they felt invited into the madness. Soon, they were headlining major clubs, conquering radio and making television history. By 1949, they had their own radio show and a powerful film deal. But beneath the success, something fragile began to crack. Dean felt increasingly boxed into the role of straight man while Jerry thrived in the spotlight. Ambition quietly strained their friendship. On July 25, 1956, exactly 10 years after their rise, the curtain fell for the final time. The partnership ended, but its echo never faded. They had changed comedy, television, and each other forever. When the curtain finally fell, many assumed Dean Martin's brightest chapter had already been written. They were wrong. The end of that partnership didn't dim his light, it freed it. By the late 1950s, Dean had settled into himself. His solo career bloomed with effortless confidence. His voice had aged like fine whiskey, warmer, smoother with time. And there, glass in hand and mischief in his eyes, was Frank Sinatra. Dean and Frank had crossed paths years earlier, back when Dean was still fighting for recognition. But it wasn't until 1958, while filming Some Came Running, that their bond truly took shape. The film succeeded, but the real magic happened off camera. Mutual respect turned into friendship, and that friendship became legendary. By the end of the decade, they weren't just stars, they were leaders of a movement. The world would come to know it as the Rat Pack. Ironically, they never chose the name. It had been attached to an earlier Hollywood circle defined by late nights and hard living. Dean, Frank, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, and Joey Bishop preferred calling themselves the Summit or the Clan, but the public had already decided. The Rat Pack label stuck and history embraced it. Together, they embodied a rare kind of cool, relaxed, rebellious, untouchable. Hollywood admired them, but Las Vegas crowned them kings. At the Sands Hotel, their appearances felt like events, not just shows. Inside, anything could happen. Songs blurred into jokes, jokes into improvised madness. Dean would croon with a grin, Sinatra might interrupt mid-verse, and Sammy would dance circles around them all, while Lawford and Bishop kept the room roaring. They stood on stage in tuxedos, martinis in hand, trading insults like brothers who knew each other's weaknesses and loved each other anyway. Nothing was sacred, not Frank's romances, not Dean's drinking, not even Sammy's race or faith. Risky? Absolutely. But it was delivered with warmth, timing, and trust. Beneath the swagger, there was something deeper. When faced with segregation, Dean and Frank quietly but firmly drew lines. They refused to perform at venues that excluded Black or Jewish performers, even if it cost them money or prestige. Films like Ocean's 11 echoed their energy decades later. In Dean's Palm Springs home, memories hung in the air, tuxedos in closets, martini glasses untouched, photographs frozen in laughter. The Rat Pack wasn't just a group of stars. It was a brotherhood, rebels in tailored suits. A fleeting moment when style, courage, and friendship shared the same stage. For all the swagger, the raised glasses, and the effortless wit, Dean Martin was never just the carefree rogue he played so well. Beneath the tuxedo, he was a devoted father, a man whose true center was his family. He had 8 children, but one held a particularly deep place in his heart. His son, Dean Paul Dino Martin. Dino was a fighter, singing, acting, competing as a professional tennis player, and later, choosing a path far removed from Hollywood glamour. He became a fighter pilot with the California Air National Guard. He wasn't living in his father's shadow, he was building his own legacy. Then, on March 21, 1986, everything changed. What began as a routine training flight turned into every parent's nightmare. Dino's jet vanished from radar, swallowed by clouds and silence. The search began immediately, but days passed with no answers. Even President Ronald Reagan, a close friend of Dean, ordered advanced military resources to assist. Back in Beverly Hills, Dean unraveled. He paced, chain-smoked, and prayed, clinging to hope while bracing for devastation. Frank Sinatra stood beside him, knowing this pain all too well. Desperate, Dean turned to psychics, grasping at anything that might lead him to his son. One recoiled after touching Dino's flight suit. Another pointed directly to San Gorgonio Mountain, the same place where Sinatra had lost his mother years earlier. 3 days later, the wreckage was found. There were no survivors. Dino was just 35. Something inside Dean shattered that day. The laughter faded and the sparkle dimmed. Friends saw it instantly. The king of cool was gone, replaced by a man hollowed out by grief. Frank, ever the optimist, believed work could save him. He invited Dean to join a massive reunion tour, hoping the crowds and camaraderie would bring him back. But it only made things worse. Dean no longer wanted stadium lights or late nights. He longed for quiet, for peace. On stage, the cracks showed. Forgotten lyrics, slurred jokes, moments that felt less like performance and more like sorrow slipping through. One night after a disastrous show, Dean simply walked away. He shut his hotel door on old friends and flew home without explanation. The tour continued without him, but the magic never returned. Dean was done pretending. For years, Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra were more than friends. They were a symbol of Hollywood excess and effortless cool, the heart of the Rat Pack. But behind the glamour, the friendship carried shadows. Dean refused to live under those shadows any longer, and many believe the unraveling began on June 7, 1966, Dean's 49th birthday. The night was meant to be celebratory. The Polo Lounge at the Beverly Hills Hotel promised magic. But as the drinks flowed and the noise grew louder, the Rat Pack spirit took hold. Laughter echoed, language grew rough, and chaos began to unfold. At a nearby table, wealthy businessman Frederick Weissman asked the group to lower their voices, reminding them of the women around them. What happened next has never been fully explained, but some say Sinatra felt mocked while others insist insults were exchanged. And then came the chaos. A sudden movement, shouting, grabbing, a heavy pink telephone hurled across the room, and then the sound, the dull thud of Weissman hitting the floor. Dean returned home early, unusually subdued. When his daughter asked what happened, Dean simply said that Frank had lost control. By morning, the situation had escalated. Weissman was in a coma and police were investigating. Sinatra vanished from public view. The damage had been done. In 1940, bandleader Sammy Watkins, who recognized Dean's potential, told him to drop the martini and go with something simpler, something smoother. He suggested Dean Martin. It was a small change, but one that would mark the beginning of a whole new chapter in his career. By 1943, Dean was performing across New York City, and whispers of his name began to buzz in the entertainment world. His path to stardom seemed inevitable. The Army drafted him during the war, but a hernia cut his service short, and after just 14 months, he was sent home. It could have been a setback, but to Dean, it was simply another detour in the road to success. Then love entered his life. In October of 1941, Dean married Elizabeth Betty McDonald, a woman who believed in him when he was still just a man with a dream and a whole lot of uncertainty. She saw the potential before anyone else did. Together, they built a modest life in Cleveland Heights, far from the flashing lights of Hollywood. They had 4 children and worked to keep a sense of normalcy in their home. But fame and ambition, as they often do, began to take their toll. As the years passed, the weight of Dean's rising career strained their marriage, and by 1949, their relationship quietly dissolved. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't explosive, it was just a quiet ending to a chapter that had once been filled with hope and promise. In the years that followed, Dean kept fighting. The early struggles, the sacrifices, the small-time gigs and hidden rooms, those moments of struggle had shaped him into the man he was becoming. Dean Martin was no longer just a fighter in the ring or a man hustling for a break. He was becoming an icon, and the road ahead, though still uncertain, was clear with potential. His voice, once an instrument of survival, was now his ticket to the world. But Dean Martin never did things the easy way. From a broke boxer in Ohio to a rising star in the music world, Dean had already lived a lifetime by the time most people were still chasing their dreams. The 1940s were filled with struggles, yet Dean's relentless determination and undeniable talent kept him moving forward, pushing through the hardship after hardship. His journey was never simple, but it was always authentic, defined by perseverance and a refusal to give up. It wasn't until his time in New York, still struggling to get noticed, that fate finally smiled upon him. It happened in 1944 when Dean crossed paths with Jerry Lewis, a fast-talking, wild comedian whose energy was as unpredictable as it was magnetic. Their first interaction was brief, a fleeting exchange between 2 men who seemed to be moving in different directions. Yet there was an undeniable spark, a chemistry neither could ignore. By 1946, they teamed up, joining forces to create an act that would go on to become one of the most iconic duos in entertainment history. Their debut at the 500 Club in Atlantic City, however, didn't go as planned. The crowd sat in stunned silence, unmoved by their performance. The tension in the room was palpable, but with nothing left to lose, Ann and Jerry threw out the script, trusting their instincts and allowing their raw, unscripted energy to take over. Dean's effortless charm, combined with Jerry's chaotic, larger-than-life presence, turned their act into something electric. The crowd, initially cold, was soon roaring with laughter. The magic was born that night. From that moment on, Dean and Jerry were unstoppable. Their act was raw, untamed, and completely alive. Dean's smooth, calm demeanor balanced Jerry's explosive energy, creating a dynamic that captivated audiences wherever they went. They became the stars of the biggest clubs, the most popular radio shows, and the most coveted television spots. Yet as they soared to new heights, cracks began to form in their relationship. What had once been a partnership rooted in friendship and mutual respect began to change. Dean, who had always played the straight man, began to feel overshadowed by Jerry's larger-than-life antics. The pressure of their fame, the relentless public attention, and the burden of being in each other's constant orbit began to tear at the seams of their friendship. By 1956, exactly 10 years after their debut, their partnership came to an end. The world watched as Dean and Jerry's act dissolved, but even in the wake of their split, the influence they had on the entertainment industry was undeniable. Dean, never one to shy away from reinvention, continued to evolve. He embraced sophistication, trading in the chaos for the class and confidence that would come to define his new image. With sharp suits, an effortlessly smooth voice, and a swagger that couldn't be imitated, Dean was ready to step into a new chapter of his life. His acting career skyrocketed, and movies like The Young Lions proved to the world that Dean was more than just a comedic genius. He was a serious actor, capable of depth and range that surprised even the harshest critics. His transition from comedy to drama was nothing short of remarkable, cementing his place in Hollywood as one of the most versatile performers of his time. Then came the moment that would change everything: Frank Sinatra. When Dean met Frank, it was more than just a friendship. It was the beginning of something legendary. The two shared an instant, magnetic bond. They had similar talents, similar swagger, and a shared attitude that made them both larger-than-life figures in a world that adored their kind. Together, they dominated the Las Vegas nightlife, transforming the city into their own personal kingdom. With the rest of the Rat Pack by their side, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, and Joey Bishop, they created a legacy that would go on to define an era. Their friendship became the stuff of Hollywood legend, two kings reigning over a world full of flashing lights, endless parties, and untamed spirits. But as with all things, cracks began to appear in their perfect world. Behind the glamour, beneath the wild nights of laughter and champagne, there were moments of darkness, of conflict that no one saw coming. Dean, always the quiet one, began to feel the weight of it all, the pressure, the fame, the constant attention. What had once been a rock-solid friendship now felt heavy, as if something had shifted. The bond they had was tested in ways neither of them expected. Dean's departure from Frank's world came quietly, without warning. The public was left confused, wondering what had happened. The world never received a full explanation. Instead, there were only whispers, unanswered questions, and the silent departure of one of Hollywood's most celebrated friendships. For those who were close to them, the rift was a painful, inexplicable break. What had once been an unshakable bond between two men who had ruled the world together was now simply no more. And as the years passed, the public continued to speculate. Some thought that the pressures of fame had taken its toll on them both. Others believed that the two friends had simply outgrown each other. But the truth remained elusive, hidden behind the smiles and laughter and behind the glitz and glamour of Hollywood. For Dean Martin, though, the silence spoke louder than anything. His quiet exit from Frank's world marked the end of an era, a period of time when Dean and Frank had been not just partners in fame, but brothers in spirit. In the end, the true nature of their friendship, what caused the fracture and why it ended the way it did, was something the world would never fully understand. But one thing was clear: Dean Martin had carved his own path. He had always fought, always kept going when the odds were against him. And no matter how complicated his relationships were, Dean Martin was destined to keep reinventing himself, to keep fighting for what was his, and to leave a legacy that would never be forgotten. The incident crystallized a painful truth for Dean. He had always been a private man, gentle off stage, uncomfortable with confrontation. Sinatra, on the other hand, lived on the edge, surrounded by chaos. That birthday night represented everything Dean no longer wanted in his life. Afterward, the calls stopped being returned. The friendship faded quietly, permanently. The scandal was buried, as many were in that golden age of fame and influence. But Dean Martin never forgot that night. He arrived to celebrate another year of life, but left carrying the weight of a broken bond. and the realization that sometimes even legends must walk away, because beneath the glitter, the cracks were always waiting.